right. So let's just mark this. This is going to be, what I think is going to be a 2-day session. Right now it is November 14th, 2023. So let's just start out by just introducing yourself, who you are, where you're from, maybe where your family's from as well, if it's important, and your profession, what exactly you do.
Okay. My name is Laura Ann Singh, and I'm a vocalist. That's what I do for a living. And I was born in East Tennessee, and I don't have any Latino heritage at all, but I've made a lot of my career singing Brazilian music, and that kind of segued into me also singing other Latin music in Spanish. So, and I'll sing in any language that you give me. I love it. It's fun.
So just the whole idea of just like singing in different languages and interpreting that is something you've always been into?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So what made you specifically interested in Brazilian music and bossa nova in general? Because this is the general topic of what I want to touch on later in the interview. So I know you have a lot of experience with that. So just tell me where that origin or that interest came from.
When I was 16, a boy I had a crush on gave me a mixtape.
Oh.
And I loved it, and it was great. And he had great taste in music, and he put on there, we had no streaming. We had CDs, like CD stores were the only thing you had. The vinyl hadn't had a big resurgence yet in mainstream. And so CDs were at an all-time low because you couldn't even buy a lot of albums. They were like out of print. So there was no YouTube, there was no way to go, unless you had someone's old record collection and a record player, which were kind of like on their way, like they were not in every house for sure. You didn't have access to a lot of music. What people were doing were making compilations. So unless it was like a big blockbuster record, then what you could find is like compilations of people. So it was really hard to find cool music. But this guy put João Gilberto and Stan Getz version of Desafinado on this record, and I lost my mind. I mean, I listened to it over and over. I was just like, what is this? So fast forward about 6 or 7 years, and a friend that I met at the University of Richmond, his father, he's half Colombian, and his father was transferred to Sao Paulo, and he spent his summers in Sao Paulo while he was here. He came back and he gave me João Gilberto's first 3 records, and that really just opened up. He found it like in a record store there, a CD store. That changed the course of my life single-handedly because I just was obsessed. I just thought it was some of the most beautiful stuff I'd ever heard. So then I started translating it, and at that point I didn't know anything about Portuguese. I was an Italian minor and I spoke some Spanish too, but I didn't know anything about Portuguese. So I got really into understanding the poetry of the, a lot of it was Tom Jobim music, and that's where it started for me.
So then when did that turn into performing?
Pretty soon after I got those records. I was singing a lot of standards at that point, jazz, like a Great American Songbook standards. So I was really steeped in that tradition. I'd been singing in that for a few years. I was still a young singer though. But I said we should make this project, and I found a guitar player, Kevin Harding, who teaches here also. And we started learning these songs systematically almost. I mean, on that record we learned almost all of them, and we had to fill out our set because we didn't have enough material. We had to fill out our set with like standards. So we would do like 8 bossa novas and 6 American like jazz standard kind of pieces, and eventually as YouTube and streaming and all of these things started opening up, we started finding more music more easily, and we both were digging and learning, and so we learned a lot about Brazilian music and just kept performing as much as just building the repertoire that we had. So
and it's really interesting, especially for the stuff that I want to talk about later, that even at that point starting off, it was a mixture of like, okay, we're learning some Brazilian, but we're also mixing it in with the American jazz standards.
Yeah.
Because that touches on like something on bossa nova that's been a problem ever since its inception in the States, or ever since it was brought over here.
Yeah.
So let's open up that conversation a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
For you personally, what do you think is the current relationship between bossa nova, or Brazilian music, and American jazz?
It's interesting because, like, bossa nova doesn't like the songs still the songs from bossa nova era, which was a very short, like, brief period in Rio, which was a confluence of like traditional kind of samba rhythms distilled really into the guitar playing of João Gilberto. He was so integral with this. But then with really modern harmonic sensibilities, European, more 20th century harmonic movements and melodic ideas from Jobim. So it was this marriage of these two types of music that kind of represent what you had bumping into each other in Brazil, right? Like culturally, because of immigration and slave trade and all the things that make the Americas, right? Which is a similar kind of birth as jazz, right? So I think that the biggest, so bossa nova doesn't really exist in Brazil as like a living art form. People still venerate the songs, and samba and choro are very much alive and well. Yeah. But bossa nova musicians aren't really like, it's not like a thing like it is here with jazz musicians, right? What you have are really competent, incredible, virtuosic even players like you have in the jazz world here, that are doing different things with new music and reimagining older music. Okay. But bossa nova as a genre doesn't really exist as a living form in that sense of, which is, you could kind of say that about jazz. It depends on who you're. I mean, I know that jazz is alive, but it's a very like erudite thing. It's not very much from the earth anymore. It's not like coming from the people, and so I don't know. That's a totally different conversation. But I think the main problem in this confluence is that Americans tend to think that Brazilians were influenced by American jazz, and that's what created bossa nova, when that's not at all what happened. Yeah. They were independently created, and around the same time they were happening. Yeah. And then, of course, with globalization, with just the nature of how culture moves and works, these two rubbed off on each other, and they did have a confluence, and they sit nicely in the same, like, it's easy to listen to an Ella Fitzgerald song and then listen to a Jobim song. You know, those things can, or a Count Basie song, I should say, and then a Jobim song, you know, those, they have similar kind of like, it's not like one is like really loud and bashing and crashy, and the next one's really soft and quiet. They kind of go, they go nicely together. Yeah. So people were mixing them and doing things like, you know, Frank Sinatra did a solo, a record and a performance at Carnegie Hall with Jobim. Stan Getz, of course, performed lots of records, played with João Gilberto. They did records together. Donald Byrd was recording with Brazilian musicians and playing Brazilian songs. So you had a lot of Americans digging into that, and then of course you had the American, like, how just like culturally influential America is in the world. You had people that were, you know, wanting to be more American in their stuff. And like I said, Carlos Lira, who's a famous bossa nova composer, wrote a song in the 60s called Influência do Jazz, which means the influence of jazz. And it starts off singing, "My poor samba, he's being like tinged by all of this like jazz influence, like," and it's kind of like the song is a joke, you know, like laughing about how all these people playing bossa nova are trying to sound more jazzy in their approach instead of like Brazilian.
Yeah. So I'm going to be honest, the next question I had was sort of like, when did a bleeding between the two start to happen? But from the way you were describing it, it's almost like from its inception, that almost started to happen. So I guess we should probably shift that more from a where into more of like a how. We kind of touched on why, but like
I will say, I think that it started way before, because
way before. Okay.
you have Havana, you have Rio, you have these cultural centers that were exotic and cool locations for Americans to think about traveling, to think about, like culturally they were exotic, you know, and alluring, and stereotyped.
Yeah,
for sure.
Stereotypes, definitely.
So, but they were like very. It would be like very aspirational to be like, oh, I'm going to Rio, you know, oh, I'm going to Havana.
Yeah.
That was like it was a high society kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, so you have someone like Carmen Miranda, who was a Portuguese immigrant in Brazil, who exoticized Brazil even more, and then made a show that she took to specifically to America. I mean, she did perform in Brazil too. It was very famous there. But
primarily America.
But well, she had her sights. You know, she knew what she was doing. In fact, one of the great bossa nova composers, João Donato, who just died this year, he was in her first band and was fired because he was playing too Brazilian.
Oh, okay.
She wanted something very palatable for the American audience.
Okay.
And so that was way pre-bossa nova. That's
Yeah.
like you're talking 40s, you know.
Yeah. Because the inception was around early 1960s, so we're talking
Late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
So you have this exchange already happening.
Yeah.
Where you have the Gafieira, the big band from Rio. You have the Afro-Cuban stuff that's happening in the big band role also. That's happening alongside the Glenn Miller Orchestra and this kind of stuff. So these things were already kind of trading and interweaving. So you have a cultural awareness that this music scene exists somewhere, and that it's cool, that it's good. So I think that predates the bossa nova thing and allows for that kind of initial starting to blend and being influenced by each other. And honestly, I would say, I'm sorry to interrupt,
It's all good.
that Americans were more influenced by bossa nova than the other way around.
Yeah. So just to summarize it, would you say it was a mixture of like American exoticism and the globalization that was starting to occur around that time?
Absolutely, but I think it's important to remember that globalization has always happened.
Yeah.
Right, like it's not a new phenomenon. It's sped up for sure because of our modes of travel and change of information, the exchange of information. But it's always been going on. You have caipirinha coming into America, the drink that was created in Sao Paulo in a hotel.
Yeah.
Sao Paulo, not Rio. And you have that being served in America, you know, within 5 years of it being invented in Brazil. So yeah, you have this exchange that's happening for a long, long time before bossa nova, and because of the exoticism of the American view, I think, of Brazil and Rio, it was widely accepted. There was a lot of people were excited about it even. You know?
And yeah, with that point, or at least being acceptable to the American palate, it really touches on like the main takeaway I was getting when it comes to this topic. And it's interesting because this is something that I've also been slowly talking about and learning about in my Latin American study classes as well. And it's almost like this idea of integration of something from a foreign culture versus assimilation of that thing. We look at the history of bossa nova, what we know is bossa nova today, and with your stories of, oh, let's make this more palatable to the American audience, it's almost like these aspects of Brazilian music is assimilating itself into American jazz to create the modern product we know as bossa nova today, because like you said, bossa nova is like less of like something that was imported from Brazil, but more something that was, aspects were there, but like the modern image was created in America with all these factors coming together, rather than an integration of it all, where it's like it is almost, not exactly verbatim isn't the right phrase to use, but almost like as pure or authentic, this is imported to America, and almost like a culture revolves around that. It's almost like, I could be completely wrong, so tell me if I am about this, but it's almost like these aspects sort of adapted to the American culture, fit into that to start off, but almost like after that fact, it's almost like we've been slowly starting to go back to those roots and maintain that a little bit. What's your stance on that?
So, can you rephrase the question just a tiny bit? 'Cause
Oh.
I think I know what you're saying, but I want to just make sure.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest, this was more of this is turning more into I wanted to talk to you about this, or just a ramble more than just a question.
Yeah, yeah.
But I guess, what is your stance on on integration versus assimilation when it comes to bossa nova?
I think with capitalism, you're always going to have some aspect of both of those things, and assimilation in the sense of what will people buy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a hugely unfortunate thing, because I think it stymies creativity a lot, and it forces a code of like normalcy that everybody decides is, or like, you know, the market decides is like palatable.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of courage and a mixture of the right time and place and luck and everything else to break out of that and start to really move culture beyond those norms. I think in Brazilian music, like the, you know, Carmen Miranda brilliantly played into the hands of it. You know, she's very, like, eyes wide open. She knew what she was doing, and benefited from it. You know, she also rose awareness for a country that no one would even really know of in the United States. She made a distinct, somewhat problematic and harmful going forward, this exotic kind of Latin, feisty, tropical, you know, when Brazil is like the United States. I mean, it's tropical and it's not also. There's like the whole South is like very temperate, and
so it's almost like we were talking about before, almost like having these stereotypes set in place that, whether we like it or not, are just associated with the genre or the culture.
And the problem is that even people from the culture, from Brazil, they're going to, most people are going to act in a way that benefits them. So if someone says, hey, I want you to wear this stupid hat and sing this stupid song and do this stupid dance, they'll say, well, okay. I mean, I think you have that happen a lot, you know, for all artists in all capacities. So I think they both are at play. I think that in the best light, integration happens because you have people mutually respecting each other, and wanting to, like I said, partake, like an American musician, really wanting, like, loving something and wanting to partake of it, like be a part of it, and coming with a humble spirit, maybe being confident in what they can bring, but humility to say, like, I really want to learn from you as well. And those, I think that those instances, you can see that they're, whenever that kind of synergy happens, there's something that's really beautiful that's born. And the assimilation thing, you know, I think it's an inevitability that happens as something kind of continues to mix and be in culture.
Yeah. So I guess just the final note for today before we call it and we could resume it the next day. I just wanted, so part of this is I wanted to look into other scholarly articles that pretty much discuss this whole topic, not just, you know, the genre in general, but also some of the things we've been talking about. And it led me to find some of these studies when it came to jazz and bossa nova record classification when it was actually, you know, starting to rise in popularity.
Sure.
So there were two studies that were held at the time. One of them is Brazilian, either just considered Brazilian music as a whole or samba, and then the other is asked whether bossa nova can be considered a blend of samba and jazz. Again, this mixture of like American Brazilian roots. So for this first one here, I will put this for the people watching at home. I'm probably just going to put a link so you can see the article for yourself if you want. It's going to be page 8 of that link. So around here, toward the beginning, you could see it's strictly like samba and Brazilian when it's when it was first popular in 1962, that Brazilian identity is still there, probably because of the exoticism and the way it was first advertised at the time. But as you can see, the more time goes on, obviously that samba identity, it's still present, but it's slowly going down and more of just being considered its own thing, not exactly just Brazilian, more of just like, okay, it's bossa nova, or maybe there's some people here, okay, it's a blend of samba and jazz, or even this column here, that's, oh, it's just pop, it's just Brazilian pop, so you can see it's sort of like has that cultural identity and it's slowly going away with time. Then we get to the second chart here to where whether it's like a blend of samba and jazz or whether like the record has influenced the bossa nova or not. So we can see starting here, some songs have bossa nova, some songs have the flavor, the record is solely bossa nova. We're going to talk about more of just the authenticity of it all tomorrow, and then there's records that aren't. It really kind of fluctuates sometimes. You could see, similar to the other chart, it's less of like, okay, this is the distinct Brazilian bossa nova identity, and more just, okay, some songs are mixing in there, some songs are jazz, some songs are bossa nova, some songs have that flavor. Originally, 62, you can see there was none with flavor at all. It's either just bossa nova flavor or no bossa nova. But as you can see, again, we start to see more of that mix coming along. So again, it's what we talked about before, to where with all those factors, jazz and bossa nova are just slowly bleeding together to form what we know it as today. And almost, I don't want to say, actually we could go down that route to where they almost became like symbiotic, where like one kind of benefits from the another, the way like bossa nova develops and it could help benefit jazz, jazz develops, it could help bossa nova. So you could start to see, like, starting from 62 going to 1969 with those two charts, you could see more of like the less of the separation and more of like this mix of the two. So do you have any final thoughts for today, just about anything that we talked about already, or?
Yeah, I think that they were, that as artists started working together, that there was an inevitable blend, right? When you have half the band is American and half the band is Brazilian, then it's going to be a blend.
Yeah.
Even if you're playing bossa novas, they're going to come from a different, Americans are going to come from a different, like, body of work and experience. And so, yeah, the blend is inevitable, and it's actually, I think, how culture moves forward. So I think it's not necessarily bad.
Well, no, yeah, I hope I wasn't going.
No. I think it's interesting. I think it's not necessarily. I think it can, like you said, benefit both, but it can also, in other cases, I think it can just end up that these two kind of merge and they become a new thing.
Yeah.
So maybe that's kind of what's happening too.
Yeah. All right. Day 2, slightly more fancy attire concert tonight. So right after sound check, we are going to pick up where we left off before. Do you remember vaguely where we left off last time?
Sure.
I believe, we just had the assimilation integration talk, right? Okay, perfect. So do we need to review a little bit of that? Do we think we're good to pick it up?
I think we're good.
Okay, good. So the first question I have after the discussion is, after what we talked about yesterday, where do you think the genre stands in America at the moment? If you want to talk about Richmond in particular, that would also be a plus, but just where do you think it stands after the talk that we had?
I think it's probably fairly consistent around the country, and I think it's very palatable. I think people still respond to it. I think it's nostalgic, and people associate it with like feeling good, kind of loungy, laid back, but party vibes. So I think I think that's kind of where it stands.
Yeah.
And I think people really revere the people that started it. So when some of those Brazilians have toured in the U.S., people a little more in the know packed out those concerts, like Marcos Valle, or even Caetano Veloso, and some of these guys that came after Bossa Nova. but we're very influenced by that. You have people still supporting those artists who have, we're losing those people now. So because they're getting older, but so that I think it's very positive, and I think it's very well received whenever it's a part of something.
And would you say there's that same reception? I don't want to say reverence per se, but is there that like same reverence in Brazil as well, even with all the American traits that the genre's taken with time? Or?
Yeah, I think the genre is much more Brazilian than American.
Yeah.
In how it's played here and there. So I think that if anything, the influence happened more from there to
Brazil.
here.
Yeah.
So I think that in Brazil, of course, it's people really love it and like have a lot of respect for it. I wouldn't say it's being performed constantly there.
Yeah.
It's people are much more into samba, forró, short, sertaneja. There's a lot of different art forms that are very, very specifically Brazilian, that have a lot more cultural popular pull right now. But bossa nova is still really highly regarded and respected, I would say.
All right, so the last couple of questions I have just relates to you personally and the work that you're doing here in Richmond and even outside of that. Would you say that the type of work you're doing with either interpretation or performing is helping to maintain the authenticity of the genre?
Sure. I think that
that's how I originally wrote it. But
I think authenticity is a difficult question, right?
Yeah.
Because, when I go to Brazil and sing, I know that my approach is different, and it can't help but be. But does that disqualify me from participating actively in making art? I don't think so.
No.
I think that it's just bringing my full self with as much respect and learning as I, could have done up to this point, and an openness to continue that process. So, yes, I do think it's very authentic because I'm approaching it very authentically, and without a desire to dominate or mold it to me. I want to be molded by it more. So I think I do think that is important. I think that the original music I've written has a lot. It's incredibly informed by bossa nova and samba, and so it's I like to think I would be some tiny small part of moving that genre into the future.
Yeah. So what is some of that work that you have done post the pandemic that you would want to share that highlights that?
Well, my bossa nova band continues to play. I've done work in Brazil. I've been able to sing and collaborate with some musicians there that I really enjoy playing with. Alvaro Maia, Milena Lopes, so two musicians that I've gotten to play with. Grupo Choronas, which is a group of all female choro players. So I've gotten to sing in really beautiful situations that I'm grateful for. If you're talking about just Brazilian music now, with Miramar, I've done we're finishing a record right now, so that's been exciting. We have a gig with the Richmond Symphony next year. We are also Marlise and I, who's a piano player by Ritmo and for Miramar. She and I have a project of all original music, of Brazilian music, that we started recording this summer with a CultureWorks grant. So we're working on that. We just played a couple of weeks ago our first show of that, and so I like to. And then of course I have a lot of I participate in other projects, other people's projects, like more avant-garde label, Out of Your Head Records, and we just did a 5-year anniversary party with Professor McGraw. He was playing there with Penny, and I participate in other people's projects as well. And some of those, Scott Clark, who's a drum professor here, was on his last record. I just released this this fall. I was the featured vocalist for an album of Jobim arrangements by the arranger Doug Richards, who was the former VCU director of jazz.
Yeah.
And that was a great project to be involved with. So lots of little things bubbling.
Some stuff here, some stuff there, yeah, a little bit of everything. So, is there any like last minute things that you would want to add on before we end? Anything you would maybe want to ask me? Anything you would want to give as a note?
What are your plans for music?
My plans? Well, okay. Let's see. From here, well, this is one of the classes for my music major, so I'm going to go on to complete the classes for that. More musicology after this class in particular. We're going to be looking at music and pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
Then after that, then it's the scary senior capstone. So we got to figure out specifically what I want to do for that. But ideally, it's something that highlights everything that I learned while I was here, just so I could showcase like sort of where I started and where I've eventually landed with a more varied skill set aside from just classically trained singer.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's what I'm aiming for on that, and maybe a little bit of this material as well, because this has been like a very unique experience for me. I like how this major combined with my other one is almost like taken some aspects from a bunch of different majors. I've done a little bit of anthropology, a little bit of political science, a little bit of literature, but I think I really want to hone in on like this aspect in anthropology a bit more, because interviews like this just really intrigue me, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, good luck.
Yeah.